All right, it looks like we are live. First time ever live stream on the channel. Very, very exciting stuff. So we are here with our friend Kash. Hello, Kash. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, JC?
Yeah, I'm very well. So great that we actually had finally the opportunity to start showing all of our research to the public. Yes, to tell people watching. So, Kash and I have been working on the Quran already for quite a long time, and we've been exploring it in as much detail as we possibly could. We have found a lot of stuff in it, and we were trying to figure out what was the best way to tell the people what we have found. So, after much consideration, we decided, okay, let's do actually live streams where we can do some of the lower impact stuff first, which is still very exciting because these arguments that are not being discussed by anyone just yet. And like this, we introduced some advanced concepts one at a time. So by the time that we get to the very, very, very important stuff, people will already have all of those skills that we have told them, session after session. So with that in mind, we have prepared this very first slideshow where we talk about one topic. We are going to introduce as well quite a few things that will be useful for later, and we will try to make it as exciting as possible. So, Kash, what would you like to add to this quick intro?
What I'd like to add is that a lot of what we do when we have conversations with Muslims and talk about Islam generally is a lot of it is smokes and mirrors. We're essentially boxing at a straw man created. That way we exhaust ourselves and never get to what actually matters, which is the Quranic text. It's always this debate about the morality of Momo, or let's talk about X, Y, and Z, the different traditions. But as people like Jay Smith hammer away at, is that these traditions come way too late and far too north. So instead of engaging with the traditions, we will always, look at them because they have some valuable information at different times. But we are interested primarily in the source text, which is the Quranic text. So instead of dealing with all the different smokes and mirrors, what we want to do is go back to the source. What is it exactly that we have when we use this word Quran? What is it we're talking about? What do we mean? What was it in the 7th century? What was it then in the 8th, ninth, so on? Was it perfectly preserved? All of these questions. These are the important ones. What does the text actually say? These are important questions. So instead of dealing with the traditions and punching ourselves exhausted, what we want to do is go straight to the text.
Right. And with that in mind, this is what we've got prepared. So 10 different sessions, and every single one of them, they build on the previous one. So, and which one should be the first topic that we should discuss today to start this introduction to finding the Quran?
Well, we'll unravel the first scroll here, and that is the
Let's see.
magical nature of Arabic,
Wow.
specifically Quranic Arabic.
Oh, yes. I think we have all heard many things, particularly from people like the Christian Prince, who says, well, there are some rules in Arabic which make absolutely no sense. However, because those things appear in the Quran, they have now become canon. Because otherwise, well, the Quran would be false. So they have seem to have edited the language to conform with the Quran because it's supposed to be this perfect Arabic. But probably we're going to see otherwise, aren't we?
Yeah, well, if it was the case that there's incorrect grammar or incorrect Arabic grammar in the text, this would totally make no sense because it's supposed to be the kalam Allah, the perfected, unchanged, direct word of God Himself. And
In
God, if
Arabic.
anything, should speak languages properly.
Yes, certainly. There shouldn't be any grammatical errors, any problems with the tenses and with the genders and things like this. And of course, there aren't because, it's perfect Arabic and it says things like these ones here. So we have here just one verse from the Quran, which is phenomenal. This is meant to be Jesus speaking and saying something like, peace is on me the day I was born and the day I will die and the day I am raised alive. And any Christian would actually look at that and say, oh, wow, the Quran is phenomenal. It's actually acknowledging the death and resurrection of Jesus. But then Muslims will say, no, 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 that's actually not what it says. So you have to argue, but that's just what I have read. It says there death and resurrection. And then they would have to explain that away because it's a magical language. So in this verse, when it says that he died or when he was going to die, it doesn't mean death, it means something else. Maybe he went to sleep or something, and by raised alive, which anyone would understand as resurrected, particularly in the context of Jesus, they say, no, 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 he's just taken up to the heavens alive. It's like, but hang on a minute. I know the story, and this actually seems to be almost verbatim what the story says, death and resurrection. And when you go to the tafsirs, they're of course just trying to explain this away. There is one tafsir, for instance, that says, no, that actually talks about a time when he would actually die, he would go to the grave in the future, and then he will be resurrected, on the day of resurrection. And it's like, but even according to your own traditions, that didn't happen. He didn't die and he's not going to go to the grave, but they have to explain this away. But because it is magical, we know that when the Quran says, Jesus is speaking, that he will die and he will resurrect, that's not what it means because magic.
Right. And if you are a Christian looking at this, you say, "Wow, this is my book. This is good. The good stuff. This is talking about what I believe." But of course, like you said, the tafsirs explain it away. But the question here is, okay, we see in the Quran it says that only those who have corruption in their hearts or whatnot. I'm paraphrasing here. They are the ones who focus on the unclear verses, while the clear verses you should focus on, right? But the question is, okay, is this one of the unclear verses or is it a clear verse? I thought the unclear verses are things like the muqatta'at, where you have the unjoined letters, which alif lam mim, alif lam ra, they don't mean anything. Are those unclear? Is this clear or is this unclear? So for me, when I'm
Allah,
reading this, it's
I think
pretty clear.
I think it's Allahu Alam. It's magical. This is what we're trying to explain. It's a magical language. So it is clear if the person explaining it to you is a Muslim, then what he says is the clear explanation. Otherwise, it's not clear if you are a kuffar. That's how it works.
And the way it works is by means of intermediaries. So there is two types of Islam, even at the Hafs level, the 1985 version. We have the level of the Islam of the Quran, and then we have the Islam of the Imam. And there are two different Islams, because if you go to the text and you don't listen to what you're told to interpret the text as, instead of going to your rabbis and monks, as we see in Surah 9, as being something that's bad and you shouldn't do that, apparently that's what we do. We take our Islam from the Imams, not from the Quran. It's pretty clear here.
hmm Indeed. So should we look at anything else? Let's see. Is the next one a very clear verse or is it a very unclear verse? What are
Ooh,
we going to see next?
we may need have to flip a coin on that. It's hard to tell which ones are clear and not
Mhm.
clear. But so this one is very crucial for anyone who is Christian or interested in Christology, because this verse is the clearest verse in the Quran which deals directly with Christology. What is the nature of Isa ibn Maryam? Where in here it's dotted out, but this is dealing with where it says, "Do not say about Allah except the truth," and it continues, "Al-Masih, Isa ibn Maryam, is only," and we put it here in the Arabic, and that'll become more important later, but for now we'll leave it as such, "is only Rasul Allah." This word acts like the word malak in the Old Testament. We'll get more in detail on that later, but effectively it's the messenger of God, right? And in the translations, a lot of the times, it's rendered as "is only a Rasul Allah." That is adding information into the verse. The Arabic strictly says "is only Rasul Allah," which means the messenger of God, if we stick to the standard renderings of how it works, right? And then we continue, "and his word, kalimatahu," right? And then we also get, it continues, and then, "and a ruh from him." So we have these three elements that are all what Isa is in terms of Christology, right? What the Messiah is, because Christ, Christology, means Messiah, right? Al-Masih in the Arabic. So we see that he is the messenger of Allah, we see that he is his word, and we see that he is a ruh from him. It's quite interesting. So there's a lot going on here, and we're going to be able to go into more detail about different hypothetical readings of this. There's some that lean more adoptionist. There's others that are a bit more. It gets weird. But point being here is that we are seeing what the author is writing as the nature of Isa. And we continue. So believe by Allah and his messengers. So one thing that's weird here is based just on the context. Let's not get into the details of that quite yet. And say, do not say three. This is what is read by Muslims today as being the clear refutation of Trinitarian theology by the divine word of Allah. Do not say three, because before time immemorial in Allah's word, he knew that people would come up with Trinity. I guess that's why in his word he's refuting Trinity. It's all very weird. But do not say three, for he is one. He is one deity. That's in the dots. And then we continue. Surely Allah is only one deity, right? So that's not in the dots, my bad. Surely Allah is only one deity. Subhanahu, from having a birthed one. To walk back a little bit and explain what we're even looking at here, this is the Saint Murad translation. This is the most useful tool that exists today for both Arab speakers and, very importantly, non-Arab speakers of making sense of the Quranic text in the first place. And the reason why, and we'll see this as we go along later as well, even more clearly, is that the translators lie through their teeth constantly. So to really understand what the text says, you have to find a translation that is hyper literal, at least as a resource. Because of course it has its own faults to take everything hyper literally, but at least we have the resource now that Saint Murad recently, only in the last year or so, has made available for the public, which is his translation of the full Quranic text. And this is why I'm bringing it up here. You see how I have the word subhanahu here in the squiggly brackets. This is because Murad, in his translation, he bases it on a congruence of the Arabic language strictly. And therefore, he does not translate words that are not Arabic words. So this is an example of that. So this would be given in his translation as a question mark in between two curly brackets. And this is where the audience can find some puzzle fun by going to his translation and trying to figure out, okay, what do these question mark words mean? And we have the resources, and we can get into detail about how we can do that in a second. We have the resources today for even non-Arabic speakers or people who are not experts in the Semitic languages, with caution, to be able to figure out. But so here we see something about from having a birthed one. Subhanahu, from having a birthed one. And this is translated in the, like I mentioned, the liars, as exalted is he above having a son. But that's reading into it. Subhanahu is said in the current reading, the orthodoxy, the standard Islamic narrative. It is specifically in reference to exaltation above association, something like that. But that's not based on any Semitic etymology. It's added into the reading. It's what you're meant to read it as. But it could be read as something different. Hypothetically, Subhan, glory. Ahu, he is glorified from having a birthed one. Okay, he's glorified because he has a birthed one. Could be a possible reading as well. So we're just putting it here as such. That way it's clear that this is not actually as clear as made out by the translators and the tafsir authors and so forth.
Okay, let's actually as well continue with that verse. But first, if we just roll back a little bit. So when it says, do not say three, the things that happen right before that, well, we are talking about Rasulullah, we're talking about his word, we're talking about a spirit, a ruh from him, we're talking about Allah and his messengers. Now, this being the very clear book, the way that is supposed to be read is that Allah and his messengers, and do not say three. So people are saying that Allah and his messengers are three, meaning Allah, his word, and a spirit from him being deities, but they are not. And that's the whole point, that in Christology, this is exactly what a Christian would say. So you have what? You have the word of God, yes. You have the spirit, yes. And then you have Godhead. Now, for argument's sake, say Allah. being Godhead. Okay, do not say three. And immediately after, surely the God, Allah, is only one deity. It's like, yeah, that's Christology 101, isn't it?
That's the Shema of Israel, right? That's
Yeah.
your God is one. This is what Christ affirmed. This is what the Old Testament was very insistent upon. And to piggyback off what you're saying here, it is very interesting. We have to see how it flows, because concepts build off previous information that was provided, right? So we have a listing of three different categories or three different subjects, right? That being Rasul Allah is one, his word is two, and a ruh from him is three. And therefore, well, firstly, we would then say, okay, those are three things. And then, so believe by Allah and his messengers. One reading would be that his messengers is referring to now the Rasulullah, the word, and the ruh. We are told that his messengers here, it refers strictly to humans. And the reason why is because the word here is the rusul in the plural, and rusul or rasul, right? This word is very crucial. And it's said effectively, firstly, that the Rasul Allah is only Muhammad, basically. But we see right here that it's also applied to Jesus. That's very crucial, as we're going to go into other topics later. But furthermore, we're told effectively that Rasul is a title for human messengers, right? It's prophets, it's like human beings, right? For sure, trust me, Aki, for sure, only humans. But we're going to see further later how that's definitely not the case. But crucially here in the green, we see say not three. We just listed three entities, three subjects, the Rasulallah, the word, and the ruh. So why isn't it here that the author is saying, do not identify these three different subjects as being distinct, right? Because we just saw how they were all grouped together into the identity of Isa, which is very interesting. And for those who have a keen eye, well, they would say, okay, who are Orthodox Christians, they'll say, okay, some of this is like what I believe, right? Like if I read Rasulallah as, angel of the Lord, Malak Yahweh, then, it makes sense. Okay, that's what Isa is, the theophanies in the Old Testament, right? His word, yes, I believe that, that's John 1, right? And then, but a ruh from him, that seems strange. But it also may point at a thing we do know from the New Testament, that is the Spirit descending upon Jesus at baptism. Okay, there's something there. But anyway, so the point here is that there's a lot in this verse that is not in conformity with what we are directly told to believe the verse to say.
Yes, I would add to that so we have Isa. All of this is talking about Isa to begin with. Is the only person mentioned in the whole verse. Then it's saying about the word and about the spirit. But then when it says, so believe by Allah and his messengers, all of a sudden, his messengers means, oh no, this means all of the messengers. Now, all of a sudden, this means Moses and it means Muhammad and it means, it's like, hang on a minute. Let's look at this verse. This verse is talking about Rasulullah, word, Ruh, Allah, and it's saying, hey, don't say three, it's only one God. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly what the Christians say, but this is not talking about any other messengers outside of this verse. This is very clearly talking about the word and the spirit and how those things actually blend into the whole theology, and say not three as in three different gods, because there is one, which is Christology 101, right?
Precisely. So either this is about grouping up the Rasul, the word, and the Ruh into one in terms of conceptually, or it could be a refutation of tritheism, which was there at the time, well, a little bit before it, but that this belief in three gods did pop up in the history of Christianity, although we wouldn't call it Christianity, right? But yeah, that was before full orthodoxy, and that was a type of Christianity back then.
Great. And then should we cover the last the last sentence in that very, very important verse?
Absolutely. That is, I'll read it out. For him is what is in the skies and what is in the earth, and sufficed by Allah as a representative. And anyone with a keen ear here would be peeking their ear up. So what's going on here? By Allah as a representative. But wait. We first have for him. So for him, presumably, if we're reading this Islamically, this means for Allah is what is in the skies and what is in the earth. and sufficed by Allah as a representative. That's strange, wouldn't you say? For Allah to be represented by Allah.
Yes, particularly when this whole verse starts talking about Isa and then is talking about the word and the spirit and say not three, and then something about a birth one. And all of a sudden the meaning is no, so for Allah is what is in the skies and what is in the earth, and sufficed by Allah as a representative of Allah. Allah is like, what are you talking about? This for him has to be a different character than the representative, because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense. And when we just go back from for him, so who
Right?
is him?
What is
Well,
the
you
most
have this thing about
proximate? Right. What is
yeah,
the most
but
proximate subject?
yes, and by seeing the birth one, is like, okay, so this could really mean something like Allah actually did take a birth one. But even if you say no, that's actually not the case, then you still have to go back up. And this whole verse is talking about Isa from start to finish. So that's the representative.
Right. And if based just on proximity of subjects, right? If you were to say, surely Allah is only one deity, let's take the standard translation: exalted is he above, having a birthed one. You still wouldn't say for him now, because him is the most proximate. You could say, okay, we understand based on context, blah blah blah, but no, you would say for Allah or for, right, but you wouldn't say him, or for, you would say for us maybe, right, to make it, but you wouldn't say for him. So therefore, the way I'm reading this is him is referring to the most proximate subject, which is actually birthed one here. So for him, the birthed one is what is in the skies and what is in the earth, and sufficed by Allah as a representative. If we read this through New Testament eyes, yes, it is actually Christ who has what is in the skies and is in the earth, and he's sufficed by the Father as a representative, just speculatively.
Indeed, that would be my reading as well. Okay, cool, very interesting.
So yeah, we'll just wrap this verse up. There's a lot more to go into with this verse, especially the first part of it where it's talking about the word deen. We're going to go into that as well. Basically, when it comes to unraveling what the Quran really says, it's a doors that open rooms with three more doors, open rooms with three more doors. It's a long road, but we're here for it. So yeah, and what we see here is effectively that even with all the diacritics, with all the translation, like obscuring what the text says, we still have problems with the text when it's read just on its own basis, on its own merits. But let's continue. Would you like to take this, JC?
Okay, well, this one could be a very brief one. This is an argument that people probably have heard from either the Christian Prince or Saint Murad. I think Christian Prince is the first one, because to actually bring into the attention of the population, because he is Arabic speaker, and now Saint Murad is actually making that popular as well, which is this verse which actually says, is talking about those who took the rabbis and their monks as lords apart from Allah and the Messiah, or Allah plus the Messiah. In the Arabic, that is Allah wal Masih. And you cannot do that in the Arabic. It's like, no, you don't do that like ever. And following on from the previous verse, is like, yes, this actually explains very clearly that these people were meant to take Allah plus the Messiah as lords. And then immediately after, it will say, and there is only one deity. And it's like, yes, it's
But
just like the
JC,
previous verse.
Aki, that's shirk. Aki.
It's in their book. It's in their
Okay,
book.
okay,
But
okay. If it's the direct word of God, I guess God can commit shirk, I suppose.
yes, of course. So he said that the Messiah has to be taken as Lord. Okay, fine, fair enough. But it's interesting how the language is so magical. It's
Very.
mystical, because when you go to like Sahih International, then they translate it as they have taken their scholars and monks as lords besides Allah. Oh, by the way, and also the Messiah. It's like, hang on a minute. That's not what it says there. You have just changed the meaning. That is called beta. You are going to hell, Ahi. Okay,
Very, very
because
much
based on
so.
the way that they have rendered it, is they have taken their scholars and monks and also the Messiah as lords beside Allah. They add the comma and then they add this to just remove the meaning of the verse. And it's like to separate the Messiah as they are taking him as lords, and that's bad. But that's not what this wonderful Arabic language actually says. It says clearly Allah wal Masih. So
And the thing
those
is,
were
we
the
put up
lords.
the Sahih International here, but Sahih International is not the biggest guilty one of doing what we're talking about here. Other translations, and this is the fun. I suggest anyone watching that what they should do is look at these verses that are like touchy verses and pull up on Quran.com. You can put a setting in where you can see a bunch of translations per verse and just see how everyone is making up their own bid'ah. Everyone is inventing things to obscure it more or less. Sahih International does a little bit of it just by putting the comma and putting the also, right? But it's not enough. And look, wouldn't think of it logically. If the intention of the author of this text, whether it's Allah or some scribe, was to say they have taken their scholars and monks and the Messiah as lords beside Allah, would that not be the logical way of writing it?
Yes, and it seems like that's the meaning. It's not what is written, but that's actually what it means because magic.
Right, right. And it's so ironic, right? Let's just touch on how ironic this is, right? They have taken their rabbis and monks as lords apart from, okay? So the criticism is those who are taking their authority figures, their religious theology authorities above God, effectively, right? And that's what they're doing. Instead of sticking to what God, apparently, according to their theology, said directly in his Arabic pure word, they go to their imams and their translators and their religious authorities to tell them, no, Aki, that's not what it means. It means that they also took Messiah as Lord, and that was not okay. That was not good. But if we read the verse, that's what it says. It says that you are supposed to take Allah wal Masih ibn Maryam as lords, and not your imams and not your translators who will butcher the verse to keep Tawheed.
Yes, the irony is incredible. And actually, in one of the future shows, we're going to just show some of these mistranslations, some of the very funny ones, some really gross mistranslations. So I'm really looking forward to actually putting those ones on the screen because they are hilarious. But yeah, anybody who actually wants to have some fun, you can actually go and look at different translations, and you will see how all of a sudden lots of words are added, and they really translate freely quite a lot.
It's because magic. It's because okay. It's because you don't understand. The Arabic language is so magical and amazing that you just really can't capture it in English. So you have to add words and add add whole nouns sometimes as well, so that it makes sense, so that you can properly understand the intended meaning of the Arabic. You see,
Arabic, you say. All right. So
magical,
if I remember correctly, now is when we start actually explaining why these problems actually began, right?
right?
Great. So these are three very, very good books. Well, I've only read two out of the three, but most people will be familiar with the works of Christoph Luxemburg, Gunther Lulling, and Gabriel Sauma. So these individuals, they have put forward the idea that the Quran was, in fact, first Aramaic writings, and then translated quite poorly into the Arabic language. Now, they get obviously criticized quite a lot because Muslims will just insist on the book being revealed in Arabic, perfect Arabic to that, in the 600s and so on. It's like, well, it didn't happen. It just simply didn't happen. So, and if you read any of these books, you will really realize the sheer amount of problems that the Quran has because of the script and how it's been hidden and edited through time. Obviously, for us, is quite good to have a look at the works from Saint Murad because we can then zero in on actual problems, as opposed to what some of these individuals did. For example, Christoph Luxemburg. So what he did, as far as I can tell, and how he describes it in his book, is he went all the way back to Al-Tabari, who recorded the commentary of early Muslims, scholars. of course. And there were many instances where they completely disagreed on the words, on the grammar, on lots of stuff. So that for him was the trigger of, hang on a minute, if Al-Tabari is actually talking about scholars from the previous 200 years or so, and they already disagreed about what a word actually meant, that means it was not Arabic, because they certainly would have understood it. We have a 1400-year gap to that language, but for them, it would have been very, very recent. So if they disagreed, there was a problem. Then he zeroes in on the problem and he translates the words back into the Aramaic, and lo and behold, it actually makes sense. So we can have a look at a couple of those examples. We're not going to go into a lot of detail. I would recommend anyone who is interested in this to just pick up the book, read it, and it's going to blow your mind because they went into a lot of detail. I prefer Christoph Luxemburg to Gabriel Sauma, but you read both and then decide which one is better for you. So on the very next slide, we have actually added one extract from his book. This is one of the problems that happened. So the book was originally written in Aramaic. We can qualify that by saying in part or mostly, but let's just keep it simple and say the book was Aramaic, at least in great part. The problem with the language was that the early Arabic, before they added all of those dots and dashes, all of the diacritical marks and the vocalization, you had 6 consonants which were absolutely unique. You could actually tell what that consonant was immediately every time without fail. But the other 22, so most of them, you couldn't. You actually had to understand them by the context and how they actually joined with other consonants and the whole thing being a mess. And of course, we have all heard the argument of, well, this is because they didn't need to know what consonants there were because they had oral tradition. So they looked at the book and they remembered it perfectly. Well, that didn't happen. It just didn't happen. That's why there are those many Qira'at, and anybody that thinks, no, these people really remember the whole thing and it was so amazing, it didn't happen. Okay, if that's what you think, I really can't help you. Is very far from the truth. The level of, say, oral tradition would have been the person who actually writes the book, which is Rasm only in this very early script. He would only be able to read it if he already knew what it said. But then we have the kirats, which they appear much later, and they have many different words, not only because of the vocalization, but the rasm is also different. And we're going to delve into that in future shows as well. So these people, they just didn't have that oral tradition that we've been told. Hence why in all of these shows we're going to show examples and examples and examples of what the Quran actually said from the moment it was first written in Aramaic all the way until now. Well, things changed, particularly when they translated the book and then they canonized it probably 2 or 3 iterations later, and it was a mess. It was impossible to really distinguish them. They try to cover that with oral tradition, but that didn't happen. And then you get some very hilarious stuff. For example, so we have the word caliph, Khalifa. So the way that it is actually written, it is actually a feminine form. So it would be Khalifatu, so the caliphate in English language, if we wanted to do a similar translation. But they say, no, 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 well, there's a rule, and that rule means, well, it's masculine, trust me, Ahi, would I lie to you? Well, it didn't happen. The thing is, the case ending for feminine, masculine plural in Aramaic gets confused when it gets translated into Arabic. Not all the time, but quite often enough. So if you read the book from Christoph Luxemburg, you will see plenty of these examples where you have like a feminine noun and then you have the verb in plural. And it's like, hang on a minute, you cannot have that doesn't make sense. And it's like, well, the reason is that it was not a feminine noun, it was a plural masculine noun, but because of the case ending they translated it wrong, and all of a sudden you have something that makes no sense, like in this case halifatu. And then you have the problem of, well, you have to create a rule in magical Arabic because otherwise things are just not all right. And we have a couple of other examples that we're going to just show very quickly. So the next one being, so this one is is a funny one. I have left there on the right-hand side the rest of the argument. Basically, the argument is between the top copy and the bottom copy. So in case anybody wants to see that, but otherwise just get the book and it will be from that. So in the Arabic, if we translate a particular sentence, which is, it would translate as, are the two equal to each other as example? And that doesn't make any sense. It's really grammatically wrong. However, if that sentence is then understood as being an Aramaic sentence, the proper rendering would be, are the two examples somehow equal? But in order to make that happen, obviously you need to accept that the language is Aramaic. And that is a bit of a problem for Muslims. But you can see the problems. And Christoph Luxemburg actually gives tons and tons of examples like this. These are the sort of things that their early scholars actually disagreed about. Like, how is that even possible? Because it didn't conform to the rules. Something that we have highlighted in there for future usage is that by doing this process, or this process of canonization or translation from the Aramaic to the Arabic, the alif lam, the definite article, becomes superfluous on this particular example. For instance, we're just dropping that one there because it will become incredibly important later on as we go on with other shows and we show like deeper and deeper arguments. Another example from Christoph Luxemburg is 12 tribe from the Quran, when if you translate it back into the Aramaic, it would be 12 tribes. And probably this is one of those things that the Christian Prince says, how the numbering in Arabic has these very weird rules so that they conform to the Quran. But the Quran is just translated poorly from the Aramaic and they have to cover it up. And if you have to change a whole language for it, well, you know, you go ahead, right?
Right. And instead of God speaking perfect Arabic, it seems that the Arabic language has invented strange rules that are just designed such that these mistakes you're highlighting are no longer mistakes. This is simply a irregular case and irregular rule in Arabic.
Probably is how the Arabic should have been, but then, you know, people are bad, so they corrupted the Arabic as opposed to doing it the other way around. Anyway,
Precisely.
these are fun examples.
So, just to visually show you, because I'm sure most people watching this, they may have been interested in the Islamic traditions, the Islamic, the Quran, but it's almost kind of like there's this massive barrier for them to really engage the material, and that barrier is this unapproachableness of the Arabic script because it's so archaic. It's such an archaic script form, and this is the function. Realistically, the reason why places like that use Arabic today, the reason why they still use such an archaic script form is because of this whole history of no, we can't translate the Quran into any language. It must be, we have to stick with this. Effectively, they've been locked into having a ancient script form instead of, but that's another topic, right? But what I want to show here is something that many may have not been familiar with, which is how the Arabic script works. And JC touched on it, and that's the fact that you have a very small selection without diacritics of different consonants. So here, can you see my cursor, JC?
Yes, I can see it, and I hope everybody can see it as well. Yes.
Oh, I hope so too. So what we have here is, for example, just look at these three. We look at this one. We would call it the smiley face character, right? Based on the ta here. So this is the ta. This is the T sound. In the Latin form, it's just represented by the letter T. This one here is this the ba or the nun? JC, remind me.
Yeah, sorry, I actually just stopped myself so that you don't get any background noise. That is the ba.
Okay, I forget. Between the ba and the nun. I'm surprised that it's not even listed here. Is that strange? Or yeah, weird. Because this is the tha, this is the ta, the t, and then this is the nun, or was it the ba? I forget. It doesn't matter. The point being is that in the early Rasm, you would not have had any of the dots. The dots did not exist yet. So all you would have had is this, effectively the smiley face without eyes. Think of it like that, right? And those characters are identical. And you need to then add the dots later to distinguish between them. And this is a similar case we have for other characters here. Like take this grouping as an example here. And this grouping, and this is the dot, the D sound, and this one here, when you add the dot, becomes the DH sound. The oh wait, 1 second, let's go back. The dal, and this is the right here is the R sound, and this one is the Z sound. So these are things that for us as like an audience in most part that comes from, let's say, a Western world, let's say Latin characters is our bread and butter. We don't understand these ancient script forms. It's this massive barrier to entry for anyone to engage in the Quranic text. Like you saw with me, I'm only recently understanding the distinguishment between the ba and the nun, right? So it's about this distance that we have, and it makes it almost mystical, magical, and we can't quite make sense of it. But the reality of the situation is it's actually that the language is quite ambiguous, especially in early Rasm. So I wanted to give an example here, which I call the Latin Rasm. It's a hypothetical mock example of how the Latin characters, which the audience will predominantly be familiar with, could have hypothetically existed in the past, which would have been analogous to how the Arabic characters in the 7th century did exist. So the crucial things to note is in the early Arabic, the Quran was written in Rasm. This is what we call it. It's a skeletal script. So firstly, and this is very crucially as well, there were no vowels. So, the difference between, I can't come up with an example right away, but you can come up with your own, right? Where changing a vowel would change the word entirely, right? So we have no vowels and we have no diacritics. And these diacritics are the things we just mentioned, the dots, which change a word from being a nun to a ba, to being a ta, to being a tha, right? Which are very, very different. They're not even that similar, right? And that's the way to distinguish the different consonants. That means, this is the crucial point, is that a written word could represent multiple meanings, depending entirely how later readers supplied the dots and vowels. And we'll get into more detail about precisely the timeline here later. But effectively in the 7th century, let's say 6th, 7th century, up until somewhere around the 8th, 9th, 10th century, only in the 10th century did it get fully canonized and standardized, right? But the development of this, the diacritics, the Dhamma, Kasar, and Fatha, all of this stuff, the vowelization, this came over time. So for hundreds of years, the text effectively existed in gradual forms of ambiguous script form. And this is something that as a audience that doesn't understand Arabic language and so forth, it seems so strange to us, and it is very strange. And we'll get into details about how that has implications as we go along. And here's the example of the Latin Rasm.
Yes, just before we move on to this one, if you could just go back one, let me just actually as well add a couple of very quick notes. One is, even though we have, we have the ba, the ta, and the tha at the top, then the nun is actually on the bottom line, and then there is also the ya. So they would look a little bit different when you look at them like this, but back in the before the diacritics, they would have looked very, very similar. For example, the ya has exactly the same initial position and middle position as the nun, the ta, the tha, and the ba. They actually look identical, and you would only distinguish them like with the dots. There is no dots. You see one of these peaks, you have no idea what it means. And then that is even without talking about writing conventions, which complicates matters even more. But did this thing happen about the adding the dots? Well, yes, and they know that full well as well. Abraham, it has two different spellings in the Quran. It's not exactly this topic, but that Aleph, it can be read as an Aleph or as a I, Ibrahim. Sen Murad, I asked him on a live stream, and he said there are 3 different spellings for Abraham because they were still adding the little dots or the little signs on the Aleph. So you can you have within the book certainly Abraham and Ibrahim, and I think he says that you have Ibrahim as well, but I haven't found it yet. So were they adding dots late? Is yes, they have it nowadays, and the proof is with Abraham. So I think that should probably give people an idea as to yes, they were adding dots, and then things change. In the case of Abraham to Ibrahim, it doesn't change the word, but the same thing would have happened with consonants, and that's when you have a big problem.
And an example came to mind, so I'll quickly mention it. So in my cursor, I'm going over here. This is the sin character. This has the sound of just the S, as we would understand it by English speakers. And this character just to the left of it with the 3 dots added above it, this represents the shin character, and this has the sound of sh, right? So if you had this character and you had the word effectively like this character, and then you had the p sound, which they don't have in the Arabic, they use the fa sound instead, right? That's where they, anyway. So if you had, let's say, this character and then the p sound, it would be like, let's say, sip. That was what I intended to say. Let's sip some beers, and then I had here, and I added the dots. All of a sudden, it becomes let's ship some beers, and the question becomes, okay, let's talk about logistics then, right? So it makes the word entirely different. So, and this is the thing, the diacritics were not there in the beginning. So whoever added them had so much power over how the text had to be understood. And this is something we'll get into later. So to build off this idea, to make sense of it, to demystify it a little bit, I put together this hypothetical Latin Rasm, I call it. So you can imagine here just this symbol here with a one single vertical stroke. You could conceptualize how, and sticking only to capital characters for a second, right? That this single vertical stroke could be made into a T. It could be made into an L, or it could remain as a single vertical stroke representing the I, right? And then the double vertical stroke, hypothetically, you could join them in this way, becoming an H, or in this way, becoming an M, or this way, becoming an N, right? And then here you could see with a hypothetical curved arc, could potentially become a C, it could become a G, it could become an O, it could become a Q. So this is not overstating it. This is not like, making things up. This is quite literally akin to how the early Arabic Rasm was. And this, I'm going to show a quick example that's quite lighthearted, but to make the point that for us as who are familiar with the Latin script, this is a good way of us to conceptualize analogously quite the extent of the possibility for textual corruption that is feasible if you only have Rasm. So I'll just briefly mention the idea here is that you have this, it's badly represented in this image, but you can hypothetically look at it like this, right? So the D, B, B, and R, P and R are effectively, let's say, in the Rasm would be a vertical line and then a little bit of a hook, almost like a hand axe or like a pickaxe cut in half, that kind of shape. And you can see how that could then be rendered into a B or a D or a P or an R. So this is just, this is nothing concrete or important necessarily to, don't take notes on this, guys. This is just a mock-up. So using this mock-up, let's take the very simple sentence, Jesus is God. So if the Jesus is God, you would firstly, let's say, take the word God, you would cut out the vowel, right? There's no vowels in the Rasm, okay? So there is no O. You just have GD. But worse yet, you don't actually have GD. What you actually have is the Rasm moon, half moon shape, which could become a C, could become a G, could become an O, not an O, let's leave that out because that's a vowel, right? Could become a Q. And the D, so you have GD, the D could be a R, could be a P, could be a B, right? So you can imagine now you have this semi shape like this, effectively, like a half moon shape, and then you have this pickaxe shape. That's all you would have in the Rasm if you had this analogous version in our Latin Rasm example. So therefore, if you added the diacritics, the analogous version of the diacritics in our case, you could not read Jesus is God. It could now be Jesus is cob. And now we went from talking about the divine and suddenly we're talking about corn. And we go from high Christology to high carbohydrates, right? And I know this is all, it's quite silly. And it's just to make the point. The point is to show you, as someone who's more familiar with the Latin script, how something can so radically change on the level of consonants and also on the level of vowels. So hypothetically, it could also not be read as, the vowelization of the O that comes later to make it cob could also have been vowelized as an A. And now you have Jesus's cab. And now he's a cabbie in New York, for example, right? So this is an analogy to break down the mystical nature of this boundary that we as Latin familiar people or Latin script familiar people have. and that the Arabic language is so foreign to us, I'm trying to show how ambiguous, the true extent of the ambiguity that existed in the 7th century Arabic script for hundreds of years. So that's just a quick example to illustrate this point and drive it home for the viewers to see the true realm, the true space that existed here for corruption. And
Yeah, actually, before we
yeah,
move on, let me just say something about that. Yes, you're right. It actually sounds like silly, but Kash and I, we know better. We are actually introducing this because we have seen examples of something as ridiculous as this in the actual Quran.
right,
And as we introduce more of the material and we show we have to do it one step at a time, we will get to some particular verses in the Quran which currently they make no sense, but we've never paid attention to it because they have explained it away. They've said, oh, yes, this means that thing. But actually, it doesn't. It becomes a very silly verse which makes no sense. However, once we understand how the Aramaic became the Arabic in the Quran, we start joining the dots and we start saying as well these parallels. Okay, so this Rasm is here, here, and here. Let's just take it together and see what it means. And things like this level of silly, they actually appear in the Quran, which we will show. And once we do the reverse, you will see how then it makes sense. I mean, if we say Jesus is cop, you will say, well, that is silly. Yes, but we have similar things in the Quran right now. Imagine that you have this in the Quran, and then we show how the language actually moved from Aramaic to Arabic. And by taking it back, we say this was meant to be read, Jesus is God. Then you will say, oh, now it makes sense. Before it
right.
didn't. So this is
And
the reversal that we're trying to do. There are quite a few things in the Quran which actually they make no sense as they stand, and we will show the real meaning. Uh, but at the moment we have just accepted the very silly rendering, and we have to really destroy that, and we will have to do it one step at a time because there are many different aspects. That's why we're going to introduce them slowly, showing different problems as opposed to just going with the very big one, and we have to speak for hours and hours and hours for one concept. So we're introducing them slowly. But this, as silly as it sounds, in a few shows you are going to think that it is actually not that silly and pretty much
it's
spot on.
pretty reasonable then. Like, for example, JC, if I told you Jesus is cob, Jesus is cab, or I told you Jesus is ear, it's just as silly, right? It's just as silly. And we'll get into that later. That's just a quick joke for JC in there.
I like it.
So yeah, then we'll continue now to another case. So we've gone through the issue with Rasm, how Rasm works, the space for corruption and things like this. But another thing is that we found, which is very interesting as well, is a phenomena that seems to occur again and again and again. That being that we see in the various sister Semitic languages, even back to Akkadian, it has sort of proto forms of this. I didn't include it in these screenshots, but you can look yourself. We have access to large language models, which again, you have to make sure you verify what it tells you, because sometimes it will hallucinate a little bit. But these tools are, you can access them and you can try this out yourself. The point is that you see a consistent semantic scope and semantic range, which makes sense from all the Semitic groups. You got then the Hebrew, the Aramaic, the Syriac. There's some cross pollination with meanings and stuff over time, and even down to the Ethiopic, which is why I'm including Gez here as well. The point of including Gez is to show you how this consistency of meaning is not based on geography. It's not that, oh, those Semitic groups were up there and they had their history and that's the reason for the evolution of those concepts in those Semitic ranges, but also down in Ethiopia, which is also, Gez is a Semitic language, right? Which is also further south conceptually, right? It's down if you go through the Arabic regions, and then you have Ethiopia. So these meanings were retained in the Gez and also in the Amharic, which is also not included here, but you can investigate this yourself as well. But you can see this is a handful, but this phenomena in our research, we've come across it again and again and again, where you have a general okay, to lay some foundation here, because maybe people are not familiar with what even we're looking at when we're talking about roots. So we have something not quite like this exactly, but similar things in etymology in sort of our Western languages and such. But there's something specific here in the Semitic languages, which is that they have effectively either two or three, mostly tri-radical roots. That's what they call them, right? Which is that they have consonantal roots. So if you take, for example, this HSD, that's the easiest one to sort of look at right now. That is made up of these three consonants, which can then be rendered, which has a general scope of meaning. And then you would add different vowelizations or conjugate it a little bit differently to make words effectively. So, which you can see if someone's thinking, you can see how, oh, interesting. So then if you just had one consonant change, all of a sudden you have a whole different semantic range. Yes, that's exactly how it works. So, but in this case, is the point here to drive home is that you see a consistency of meaning in certain roots. Like take one of them as an example, which is very interesting. Well, we'll dive even further deeper in the next slide about it, which is the shin, which is this S character with the line, the arrow above it. That represents the SH sound. We don't have a representation in the English for this. We just write SH, but this character represents the sound sh, right? So this root is the sh and then the ra. So shin ra. And this word in the Hebrew has the meanings of sort of prince, command, rule. And in the Aramaic, it has meanings of begin, loosen, dwell, settle. In Syriac, permit, dwell, begin. And you can see how this, because Syriac is a dialect of Aramaic, it's very similar, right? But then in Gez, you also have this idea of beginning, release, allow, which, you can see how allow would link with the permit of the Syriac. So there's this continuity of semantic scope. But then all of a sudden, in the Arabic, it means evil. Evil, I say. It's very strange. Do you have anything, JC, before I move on to some other ones?
Well, what I would say, just to clarify a little bit as well how it would be in English. So we have, for example, a word paint, and then you can make up different words based on that basic meaning, painter, painting, and you would recognize them like, okay, so they are something to do with paint, if that were the root. And then you just add a little bit more or here or there, and then it can become maybe a verb or maybe something else. So something similar. So you have these roots, which is like the basic form. And then, yes, when you add the dots or the dashes or something else, then it can become something else. So that's one. And the other one that, yes, this thing just seems to actually shift the meaning completely from all of those other languages that they have the same root. And it is not necessarily impossible. I mean, it can
Right.
happen. Sometimes you will have, say, two languages that with words that they originated from the same original root hundreds of years prior, and then all of a sudden they have very distinct meaning. It can happen. The thing is,
Mm-hmm.
like, we are seeing that not only a little bit, but a lot. And also, seeing as so much in of the Quran it happens to be Aramaic, the meaning in the Arabic, even if it is what it is now by coincidence, we need to actually look at the Aramaic meaning. And the Aramaic meaning happens to have a very different meaning to the Arabic one. So
Right.
if we went with, well, it's Arabic, is okay, well, it's a bit weird that the word is different to all of the other Semitic languages. But we should not even consider that as foul play from people, changing the meaning over time. Maybe they did, but even if they didn't, we need to look at the other Semitic languages. The Quran is filled with those words, certainly from Aramaic, and there are lots of words as well from lots of other regions. So yeah, that.
And we'll see this in cases as we go along in this series. We'll see cases where just on very surface level as a viewer, you'll see immediately how a verse makes basically no sense or is kind of goofy, frankly, in the traditional rendering based on the Arabic meanings of the roots, whether the meanings of those roots got there from foul play or from organic evolution of the semantic scope of the root. That's secondary in a sense, right? But you'll see how if we then render it as applying the Aramaic or the Syriac meaning to the text, all of a sudden it'll unlock the entire verse and you'll go, wow, there's actual theology in this book. I thought it was just a warlord's manual, right? So yeah, there's a lot in this text to actually explore. There's a lot of very interesting theology in the text. but if you read it today, it's not gonna give you that much, frankly. But yeah, so I'm not going to go into all of these, right? It's just a couple examples here where you have this, for the one on the right here, you can see you have this meaning of return, return, return. This is a very like it's so consistent, and all of a sudden in Arabic, it's not to return, it's to astaghfirullah, right? It's to seek refuge or take shelter, right? It's a very different meaning. Although it may have some conceptual overlap, the scope limitation is very intense, right? That's just another example. The HSD is also one this is the chesed in the Hebrew. The H with a dot is pronounced like a CH sound. So that would be like chesed. And this is a very crucial word in the theological scope of Judaism, in the Hebrew Old Testament, right? It has references of loving kindness. It's like the love between two people. Covenantal mercy is involved here. It's a very theologically dense word. And that you see it's retained in the Aramaic. It's mercy, piety, grace. Then in the Syriac, compassion, divine mercy, benevolent love. In the Gez, mercy, grace, kindness, divine favor. But then Arabic is like, no, Aki, trust me, it's entirely different. Actually, the word means envy and jealousy. Total reversal. The theological, meaning of it has been entirely inverted. And yeah, you can of course make, actually hypothetically, I'm not saying necessarily that this was done through malevolence, but the thing is, once you see again and again and again, the pattern emerges. So whatever, however this came to be, there is still a pattern here to be acknowledged. And this has implications for how we read the text, given the fact that it was originally an Aramaic, or a Syro-Aramaic to be precise, text. And this is the funny thing, the reason why we were just mentioning these three examples is it's just so hilarious because these three were found from a single surah. They're from Surah 113. All three of these cases are from this verse that we picked out just to make it clear that we're not, scanning the entire Quranic text and trying to find, can we put together three examples? Oh my God. No, this is from one surah. And it's a very short surah, being the second last surah of the entire Quran. It has what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 verses in it. And it reads very strangely. It has this meaning of evil, which may or may not have been the real intended meaning of the author, but yeah, it's worth investigating.
Yes, well, if only one of those words happen to be, say, from the Aramaic, that would already show that this surah means something completely different. And the chances are every single word is actually from the Aramaic and the meaning is weird. This is the rendering from Saint Murad. And in verse 4, actually, so he writes, and from the evil of the continuously hissing females in the knots. It's like, yeah, I am sure that didn't mean a thing. And the words are from Aramaic, and if we find the Aramaic words for these continuously hissing females, and then in the notes, this verse would make sense. So basically, what we're getting after reading this and trying to make sense, instead of saying from the evil of what he has created, is probably something like from the truth or from the reality that he has created, something a lot more benign. It feels
Or
weird from the evil of
foundation,
what.
because like what we're seeing here, if we look top left, right, we have meanings of beginning. Because look, we can go back to the Hebrew, but our base assumption is that we're getting most of the material from the Syro-Aramaic textual tradition. So when you're doing this work of deciphering the text, you should always look initially at the Aramaic and Syriac, right? So from the beginning, or from the loosening, or from the dwelling, these kinds of meanings may be. So from the beginning of what he has created, and from the beginning of, and then you can see again here, you have two question mark cases. So chop chop, guys, get to work, figure out what these question marks mean. This is the point of using the murad and then filling in the gaps.
Yeah, so those question marks, there are three that are actually shown, which means they weren't Arabic words. So we need to actually figure out what they meant. But I would actually add these continuously hissing females and then in the notes. That's also not Arabic. It makes no sense even to this day.
Right.
So those are also words that once we go back to the Aramaic, they would actually make sense. And hopefully we're going to get there. And even the
And in the,
final one, by the way, and from the evil of an envier when he envied. It's like, yeah, that's probably not a bad verse. It just means something very, very different.
Well, it could mean, like, the thing is, you can read this as like Satan, right? Oh, from the evil of it. It's a bit weird to say an envier, right? If we're talking about the accuser, Iblis, whatever, right? But anyway, you could say, okay, he's the envier when he envied. Okay, hypothetically, I can, well, whatever, right? But you can't do that with the verse that JC was just talking about, the continuously hissing females in the knots. I'm sorry. What we get here is effectively, in the Islamic traditions, they include this like elaborate idea of there being like sorceresses, that their sorcery would effectively be tying knots on strings and then blowing into the knots, and that carried, it's part of this whole fabricated history, frankly, of the pagan Arabia, where it's just widespread paganism, and everyone's like burying their children, their female daughters, and all of this stuff that Christian Prince harps on a lot about how that's all entirely fabricated, does not exist in the Quranic text, and only exists in later traditions. Right, so it's a similar thing here. This idea is not attested in any sources outside of the late Islamic traditions. No culture had this idea of people blowing in knots, and this is some sort of like meaning of like a curse or some kind of witchcraft. You can conceptualize, like, hypothetically, like, oh, those silly people in the past. We have this bias a lot of the time where we say, oh, people in the past, they believed silly things. And, you could sort of wrap your head around it and say, okay, fair enough. They had continuously hissing females in knots. I find that hard to believe.
Allahu alam.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So to build on this Shin Ra case, right, where it has these meanings of rule, begin, permit, dwell, loosen, right, release, allow. It has a pretty rich semantic range, and then all of a sudden it becomes evil, harm, right? This Shin Ra Ra is another such case where it effectively builds off this idea of harm, evil, with sparks, fire, harm in the Arabic. But this root is actually a very important root in the Syriac tradition, specifically in the Peshitta. The reason why is, you can see here, in the Hebrew, it starts with this idea of firmness, stability, core, loins. And the Aramaic, it then has this idea of strength, confirmation, legal certainty. This is mostly from the Jewish Aramaic tradition as well, in terms of the textual tradition, because that's what we have for the most part. But then in the Syriac, we have the Christian rendering effectively of this root in the Syriac tradition, right? This would be the Christian church in Syria, that region, which has the meaning of truth, firmness, reliability. You can see how this would track from the Hebrew with the idea of stability, firmness, something that is rock solid, is like the truth. The truth is rock solid. It's firm. It's reliable, right? So that's why in the Syriac, the main meaning is truth. And we see this, okay, I'll just to explain also the Gez, you can see how the firmness, truth, comes from the Syriac, most likely cross-pollination, or evolved also independently, hard to say, but you can see how it's a tracking, it's a consistency between these different sister Semitic languages based on this root. Then Arabic is, no, one of these is not like the other. One of these is not as it seems. That's the Arabic. Once again, with, no, it's about sparks, fire, harm, right, and so on. And to drive this home, what's very interesting about this root here is, and you might have maybe thought this because you see the word truth there in the Syriac, right? If it means truth, then surely when Christ says, I am the truth, when he applies the truth as a title for himself, surely we would see that, and we do, in the Peshitta, where sharara, or sharara, I'm not a Syriac speaker, but you can see that this is the word that is used in the Peshitta to translate John 14:6, where he says, I am the way and the truth and the life. This is the word, this is the root, this is the title that is a title among many, of course. Many good names belong to the Lord. One of many titles for Christ. And for this title, this root, the title of, to suddenly have this implication of evil, fire, harm, sparks, right? There's something very, very off about this. And something that makes me very uncomfortable. And my mind, I can't stop my mind from going to ideas of they just change words that are like related to Christ. Like, no, the truth is actually talking about evil stuff. Christ is evil, that kind of implications. But that's speculative, albeit fair enough. Here's just another example. We're not going to drive it home any more than this, and maybe one more, but we'll go very quickly through it because we're now just belaboring the point, frankly. But I thought this would be interesting to include because there's this YouTube guy now who's Matan Evan or something. I forget his full name. But he's this comedian guy who got famous from the Game Awards where he did that little like stunt, right? He's a funny guy. His name is Matan. And this is the root in question, MTN. And you've maybe seen how clips say that, your name means gift in Hebrew. And it does. It very much does. So in the Hebrew, and you can see the consistency here across the Semitic tongues as well. Gift, offering, present, gift, offering, loins, also retained from the Hebrew. Sirach, gift, donation, loins, strength, readiness. Gift, offering, grant, right? It has this idea of, when you gift something to someone or you offer something, you bestow something to someone, right? But no, one of these is not like the other, like always. So in the Arabic, we get this meaning of no, not gift. It's just firmness. But firmness, there's many words. I mean, firmness. It's a redundancy. But okay, fair enough. We've got the word firmness, strength, backbone, core. And we won't get into this presentation, but this root MTN is actually one of the supposed names of Allah. If I recall correctly, it's 51, 58, but I may have just got that off my memory wrong. But that's where we see Al-Matin applied to a title of Allah. And that verse is an interesting one, which we will go into in a later live stream. Not for now. All right. Patience. But yeah, so we just, to drive the point home, we also have another such case where you can see how oppression, extortion, defrauding, right? Oppression, harassment, rarely, strive, oppress, extort. No, bro, no. This root actually means to love passionately. So you see, when we come in and demand jizya and extort you, it's because we love you, you see. That's also a little half-heartedly. I'm not necessarily saying that all of these cases have to be malevolent distortion and what I would call sodomization of the Arabic language. But the point is, once you see more and more and more, you can't unsee it. There is a strict pattern here when it comes to the lack of consistency of the Semitic etymology with these roots when it comes to the Arabic. So basically what you do here, just a little like behind the scenes kind of thing, is when you see cases like this should peak up your eyebrows or your ears, whatever, right? Whatever the analogy, or the metaphor rather. What you should do is when you see such a case, you identify it as a smoking gun. And what you should do is find instances in the Quranic text where this root is attested and then investigate those instances. It should be a red flag. It should be you raise your alarm bells, and you should look directly, where is this happening, and so forth. But that's just sort of one of the things you can do to figure out what's going on with the Quranic text. But again, this is a massive undertaking. And like I said, you open one door, there's three more, open another door, and it spirals. So this is a long process, but yeah, just to show you, basically the idea here is to demystify and show all these questions of what's going on here exactly with this Arabic text.
Yes, and I do wonder actually what will happen when we actually look at these roots in the Quran and then we check the context. It's going to be interesting. That's called foreshadowing, by the way.
Precisely.
So yeah, we have already done quite a bit of that work, and then we will show. So, but yeah, it seems to be a pattern that happens again and again, where the meaning of a particular root in Arabic is very different to everything else. And even if that happened by, the evolution of the language, we should actually be looking at the Aramaic. So,
Yeah, good point, of
interesting.
course. So
Okay.
that's sort of the scope of what we wanted to show here, just as a baseline of essentially the issues that exist. So we went over the plain reading of the Hafs, where there's just simply problems with what the Arabic text itself says, and then how the translators will obscure it and hide it away by doing bid'ah, which is innovation, inventing things, putting words into the text that are not actually there to obscure the true meaning of the text. But then the next level is then okay, we go back to the 7th century. How does Rasm work? The space that exists for corruption, effectively. Whoever puts the diacritics in, he has the say of how it is supposed to be read. That's effectively how it played itself out, most likely. And then we went through some of these examples. Some of these examples of interesting peculiarities with the divergence, the radical divergence of the Arabic language versus the other languages. But the most important thing that we really want to emphasize is that all of this is not necessarily that crucial, in the sense that we should be going back to the Aramaic and the Syriac anyway for understanding what the meanings of these roots that we see in the Rasm of the text of the Quran today anyway.
Great. So this is then the magical Arabic and how quite a few things actually have changed, why the meanings seem to be all over the place. And it is only the very first mechanic. So mission accomplished. We have actually shown that. We could talk about that for days, but we have decided to just keep it to a minimum, to just show a handful of examples that would really show, okay, there is more to that story. But this is only mechanic 1. And we have 9 more shows to do, and we can actually have a look. So what are we going to be talking about next time, where we will introduce more mechanics, which they actually build the whole picture until we get to the very end. Particularly the last 3 are the really, really huge reveals, but we really need to introduce the problems and the mechanics beforehand. So what's going to be next on our to-do list?
Well, we saw that a lot of people have been discussing the Islamic dilemma. It's back in the news, a lot of attention to it. And that, just very briefly, the Islamic dilemma is that on face value, when you read the Hafs scripture, it claims that itself is a revelation, yet affirms the previous revelations, yet, and crucially, contradicts the previous revelations. So, we're going to also have a look at this idea of the Islamic dilemma, but from a slightly unorthodox, in the sphere of how people talk about it, perspective.
Great. So we will probably reconvene on that one most likely this Thursday. And then the Islamic dilemma is something that we have discussed as well on the channel before. So there are a couple of videos there, but we will do it with a bit of a twist, because we do have to introduce these mechanics as to what is going on with the Quran, how things are being either mistranslated, misinterpreted, misread, whatever it is. So we're introducing those mechanics so that by the time that we get to the end of all of these exposés, it would make sense. And the very final sessions will be somewhat brief, as opposed to just sitting down and say, okay, we now have to speak for 4 hours about the problems with the language and the mistranslations in order for people to understand the argument. By the time that we get there, it's going to be very straightforward, because we have been introducing things in bite-sized chunks.
And the title of this series is Finding the Quran, because that's actually what we're going to try and do. So just a little foreshadowing there.
Everything is themed. Actually, I think I should have mentioned that before. Everything is themed, and there will be times when we will purposely ignore a particular part of the argument. Like, for example, people who are very well versed on the Quran, they will say, hang on a minute. So they are talking about one topic, but there is these 1 or 2 very important verses, and they are skipping those verses. What are they hiding? Well, that will not be the case. We're not hiding anything. There will be verses that sometimes we could actually bring up on a particular stream, but we won't, because they will be part of a much larger payoff later on down the line. So we are playing with that. But when anyone actually notices anything like that and say, hey, why did they not talk about this particular verse? Leave us a comment and just ask the question. Maybe it's something that we have actually missed, or
Right.
most likely is a big payoff for later, because we want people to just really, really come with us along the way as we are just showing all of those things. And actually, with that in mind, please do make sure that you like the stream, that you share, and that you subscribe to the channel, that you are here when we talk about the next topics, as we keep increasing the intensity of the arguments that we have now been working on for a really, really long time. And we hope that you're going to find all of this very, very interesting, because It's been Saint Murad who has almost unlocked this particular area of research. For people like us who do not actually speak Arabic, it was very difficult to actually find any problems within the Quran. But because of his translation, it's reasonably easy. We can look at words that he never even translated because they were not Arabic. And he marks things as well, either with different colors, drawing attention to many different things. So those are the words that we can actually go into that and say, hang on a minute, if he didn't translate them, they were not Arabic. So what is going on? So it's a bit different to, for example, what Christoph Luxemburg did, which was he looked at the disagreements of early scholars, and then he zeroes in on that. We are just tackling the whole Quran, and the works of Saint Murad really helps point us in the right direction, and also see how some words they are diacritic in a very specific manner throughout the book. But when we go to Saint Murad, we see that the particular translation makes sense in lots of places, but then in others, they don't. It's almost like it is a very different word and the meaning is different. So that will be another mechanic. But at least for today, we have actually shown that the Semitic languages have a lot to do with it. The meaning in those languages are one, and then in Arabic is as if by magic something else. We have introduced how the very basics of how adding diacritics, which they happen late, they actually start to really change the sound of the words and the meaning of the words. And we have actually introduced as well the Aramaic reading by showing quite a few examples that should make people realize that yes, there is more to that story. We've also shown some examples that really show that the Quran is bizarre, and they are saying things that they cannot be Arabic because the translation don't make sense. And anyway, in future shows, we will actually show more mistranslations. We will introduce new mechanics as to how we went from the Aramaic all the way to the Arabic and how the deceit actually happened. But we will do it one at a time. But for now, I really hope that people watching will actually like this content, and it's going to get more interesting with every single stream that we do. Um, so, Cash, thank you very much actually for doing all of this with me and for all of the digging that we're doing together, which is phenomenal. And I'll leave the closing remarks for you. So the floor is yours once again.
Only remarks I have is to emphasize that everyone should show Murad love. What he has done here will ring in the history books. So go ahead now and be one of the first. I don't know, 1,000. I don't know how many people have already bought his translation. Sent him some love. So we'll put in the description the link to where you can get the translation by Murad. He's put in a lot of work, and he's the first to do it. So go to him, show him some love, use the translation, use it. Once you start using it, you'll become addicted because it's such a good resource. So I'll leave it with that, and I look forward to unraveling the rest of this material.
Great. And just actually to qualify that final statement, when Cash said to send him love, he meant love. He didn't mean oppress. So make sure that you use the correct Rasm and the correct root so that there is no
Don't
confusion as
demand
to what you
jizya.
have to do.
Please do not demand jizya from Murad. He's a good guy.
Okay, great. Well, Cash, it's been a pleasure. Looking forward to the next one. And thank you all for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. See you soon.
Thanks.